What if one quiet moment could change everything you thought you knew about power, dignity, and justice? Picture this: you've worked your whole life to earn respect, to sit in the seat you paid for, only to be told, you don't belong here. The cabin stares. The air feels heavier. And suddenly, your worth is being questioned not by what you've done, but by what you look like. That's what happened to Dr. Amara Cole, a calm, composed black CEO on a flight from London to New York. When a white passenger demanded her seat, the crew sided with him. They thought she would quietly move. Instead, she made one phone call, just one, and within minutes, the airline's $500 million budget froze. But this story isn't just about revenge or power. It's about grace under fire, about the kind of strength that doesn't need to raise its voice to shake an entire system. If it were you humiliated in front of hundreds, would you fight, walk away, or do something that would change the rules forever? Stay with us, because what Dr. Cole did next will make you rethink what justice truly means. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that move hearts and spark change. The morning air inside JFK's Terminal B had that familiar hum, the low blend of coffee machines, boarding calls, and footsteps rushing nowhere fast. Dr. Amara Cole sat quietly near Gate 37 reading a thin folder marked Celestial Air Partnership, Final Review. She was dressed in a soft gray suit, minimal jewelry, her short curls perfectly neat, nothing flashy, nothing loud, just calm precision. Around her, people scrolled through phones or barked into them, but Amara's stillness somehow stood out. She had learned long ago that real power didn't need to announce itself. It breathed quietly. The screen flickered. Flight 909 to San Francisco. Boarding first class. She gathered her bag, her boarding pass already open on her phone. Seat 2A. Always 2A. She liked window seats, a place to think, to detach from noise and expectations. At the gate, the attendant scanned her pass without a smile. The beep was sharp, suspiciously long. The young woman frowned. "Are you sure this is the right ticket?" Ma'am Amara lifted an eyebrow. "Yes, it should be." A pause. Then the attendant nodded quickly. "All right, you're good to go." Her tone softened when she noticed the expensive watch on Amara's wrist, the kind that whispered success even when the person wearing it didn't. Amara thanked her softly and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air smelled faintly of fuel and recirculated air, a smell she'd come to associate with travel, progress, and sometimes exhaustion. Inside the cabin, soft jazz played overhead. The first-class cabin had only 8 seats, each reclined into a private pod, wrapped in muted beige leather. A glass of water waited at every place. She placed her carry-on above and sat down. Window side, like always, 2A. Across the aisle, a flight attendant named Grace Nolan checked the cabin, moving briskly polite, practiced but tired. Years of serving demanding travelers had carved fine lines near her eyes. She gave Amara a brief glance, polite but distant. Then came the sound of polished shoes and confidence too big for the aisle. Martin Avery, a tall white man in his mid-50s, stepped in, phone pressed to his ear, voice booming. "Yeah, tell them I'll land by noon, have the board ready by 1. They don't start without me." He ended the call, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked around. His gaze landed on Amara and lingered too long. For a brief second, his brows furrowed, then, almost theatrically, he frowned and pointed. "I think you're in my seat." Amara blinked once. "Excuse me, this is 2A, he said, holding up his ticket like a badge of honor. Platinum Elite. Always 2A. Been sitting here for years." Grace stepped forward, suddenly alert. "Sir, may I see your pass?" Avery handed it over. She glanced, nodded. "Yes, sir, 2A. Then she turned to Amara. "Ma'am, could I check your ticket again?" "Please." Amara handed over her phone. Grace scanned the QR code, frowned, then looked back and forth between the screen and Avery's ticket. "That's strange," she murmured. "It shows duplicate assignments." Avery smirked. "Told you. These system errors are common when upgrades happen." Amara's voice stayed calm. "There's no upgrade. My ticket was purchased directly." But Grace hesitated, the kind of hesitation that came from bias she didn't even recognize. Avery leaned closer, voice low but full of condescension. "Look, sweetheart, I'm sure this is an honest mistake. Maybe you were upgraded from economy or something. Let's not make this difficult. All right?" That single word, sweetheart, cut through the polite air like a blade. A few passengers turned to watch. The jazz music suddenly felt too cheerful, too ironic. Grace shifted uneasily, glancing at the other attendants for help. "Finally," she said, "Ma'am, could you please step aside while we sort this out?" Amara's heartbeat stayed steady. Decades of boardrooms and bias had taught her that silence could be louder than protest. She stood, gathered her purse, and looked directly at Grace. "Would you have asked him to move if our seats were reversed?" Grace froze. For a split second, guilt flickered across her eyes. Then professionalism snapped back in place. "I just need to verify." "Ma'am, of course you do," Amara said quietly. She stepped aside, standing in the narrow aisle. Avery smiled, easing himself into the seat she'd paid for. He didn't even bother hiding his smirk. Grace disappeared into the galley with both boarding passes. The cabin murmured. A couple near 2C whispered. A man across the aisle looked away, pretending not to notice. No one spoke up. No one ever did. Amara stared at the window for a long moment at the reflection of her own calm face staring back. Inside that calm was a deep ache. Not rage, not even surprise. Just that same familiar disappointment that came when the world reminded you it still hadn't learned. When Grace returned, she avoided Amara's eyes. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It seems there's been a mix-up. Could you please wait near the front while we resolve it?" "Of course," Amara said, voice soft, almost kind. She reached for her bag, but before leaving, she looked back at Avery, who now reclined comfortably in her seat. "You know," she said quietly, "one day you might learn the cost of assuming someone's place." Avery chuckled. "Lady, the world's about earning your place." She tilted her head. "Yes, and keeping it with integrity." He looked confused, dismissive. She walked away before he could answer. At the front, Grace gestured toward the exit. "It might be best if you wait at the gate lounge, just until we sort this out." Amara nodded. Understood. She stepped off the plane, her heels clicking softly on the metal bridge. The air outside was colder, sharper. Through the window, she could see Avery sipping water, settling in as if nothing had happened, as if dignity could be reassigned. She took a deep breath. In that still moment, her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant, Celestial Air contract signing scheduled for 3 p.m. Confirm. She stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds. Then her lips curved. Not in anger, but in decision. She typed back, "Cancel everything." and then she called one number direct to her foundation's finance director. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Mr. Liang," she said softly, "freeze all allocations to Celestial Air, effective immediately." A long pause on the line. "All 600 million, Dr. Cole." "Yes, every cent." She ended the call, slipped her phone back into her bag, and looked out toward the tarmac where the plane still sat idle. Inside, the world thought she'd been humiliated. Outside, in silence, she had just rewritten the next chapter of the company's future. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, the one from years ago, when she was just a girl in a cramped Atlanta kitchen. "Remember, Amara, when they push you out of a room, don't fight to get back in. Build the next one and own the door." Amara adjusted her coat, turned toward the exit, and walked away from Gate 37. Her calm was a storm the world wasn't ready for. The sun had barely lifted above the Manhattan skyline when Dr. Amara Cole stepped into her office. The glass walls reflected the city's pulse cars gliding like silver threads, people rushing with their coffee cups and quiet ambitions. Inside, her workspace was serene. No noise, no clutter, only focus. The assistant outside her door looked nervous. "Dr. Cole, the finance division just confirmed. All Celestial Air funds have been frozen." "Mr. Liang said the board might." Amara raised her hand gently. "Thank you, Dana. I know what they'll say." She turned toward the large photo on her wall. Her mother, Lydia Cole, smiling in her faded nurse uniform. The woman who'd raised her with nothing but grit and grace. Lydia's eyes always seemed to say, "You don't have to shout to be heard." Amara took a deep breath and sat down. Her inbox was already flooding messages from journalists, executives, even government partners. Someone must have leaked the freeze order. The internet moved faster than reason, and by the time she opened her laptop, headlines were multiplying. CEO walks off flight, freezes 600 men under deal, seat 2A, incident sparks corporate firestorm. Who is Amara Cole? That last one lingered longest. Who was she? The public had only seen a poised woman walking away from an insult. They didn't know the years that had shaped that calm. Her mind drifted to the sound of her mother's laughter, soft and tired after a 14-hour hospital shift. Lydia had raised her daughter in a one-bedroom apartment off Auburn Avenue in Atlanta. Their furniture came from second-hand stores. Their dinner plates rarely matched. But every night, her mother repeated the same phrase, "Never let anyone decide your worth by the seat they give you." Amara smiled faintly. She remembered sitting by the window as a child, tracing airplanes with her finger against the evening sky, promising herself that one day she'd be inside one of them, never looking down on anyone, but always looking forward. By 24, she'd earned a scholarship to MIT. By 30, she was the youngest project director at a global energy firm. When she founded the Cole Foundation for Ethical Infrastructure, she didn't want power for herself. She wanted to fund systems that couldn't be corrupted by arrogance or bias. And that was why the seat, just a seat, had cut so deeply, not because she cared about luxury, but because she'd built her life around dismantling the very mindset that had just dismissed her. Her phone rang. The caller ID read Daniel Price, CEO, Celestial Air. She let it ring twice before answering. "Daniel." "Amara." His voice was tight, urgent. "I just heard about the incident. I don't even know what to say." "My team is investigating. You don't have to explain." She interrupted gently. "You and I both know what happened." There was silence on the line. Daniel had worked with her for years. He respected her, even admired her. But the company he led had just humiliated the very person who kept their sustainability project alive. "Look," he began again, "the crew didn't know who you were. If they had." "Exactly," she said. "They didn't need to know who I was. They just needed to treat a passenger with dignity." Her voice stayed even, but the words carried the weight of something older than anger. It was the exhaustion of having to teach decency again and again. Daniel sighed. "Give me 24 hours. I'll fix this." "Fixing it," she said softly, "isn't the same as changing it." He started to reply, but she had already ended the call. Amara leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Through the glass wall, the morning light painted her face in gold and shadow. She wasn't angry, not yet, but she was awake in a way that made silence impossible. Across the city, screens flickered with her image. The video captured by a young journalist, Eli Turner, had already gone viral. It showed Amara standing calmly as the flight attendant asked her to move. The comment section burned with outrage. "Why is this still happening in 2025? She handled it with more grace than I ever could. She froze $600 million. That's how you do justice." Amara's assistant peeked in again. "Dr. Cole, CBS wants to schedule a live interview. CNN, too." They said, "No interviews." Amara said, "Not yet." She opened the folder labeled Celestial Air, Equity Audit, and flipped through the pages. Inside were documents about leadership demographics, promotion data, customer complaints. She'd read them before, but today every line glowed differently. There were patterns small, almost invisible, that spoke louder than statistics ignored reports. Bias complaints left unresolved. Silence from executives who should have cared. Amara whispered to herself. It wasn't just a seat. It's the symptom. She stood, walking toward the window. From her office on the 42nd floor, the city stretched endlessly, alive and imperfect. Somewhere in those millions of windows were people who'd been told, directly or quietly, "You don't belong here." Her reflection merged with the skyline, and she thought of the words her mentor once told her. Real change begins where comfort ends. That evening, the foundation board gathered in the conference room. The tension was thick. Some looked worried about the public backlash. Others whispered about the financial implications. Mr. Liang, her finance director, spoke first. "Amara, freezing $600 million will shake the market. Celestial Air's stock dropped 12% this afternoon. Do you intend to keep the freeze?" "Yes," she said simply. A board member, gray-haired and cautious, leaned forward. "But isn't this personal? Maybe you should separate your emotions from." Amara's eyes lifted, sharp as glass. "If demanding dignity is emotional, then I'm fine being emotional." Silence spread. She continued, calmer. "This isn't revenge, it's responsibility. Every time we let something like this pass, we tell the world that disrespect can be negotiated. It can't." Even the air seemed to pause. When the meeting ended, some nodded in quiet respect, others left uneasy, muttering about consequences, but Amara didn't chase anyone's approval. Outside, New York's skyline glittered against a sky of fading gold. She walked out of the building without her driver, choosing instead to walk. Her heels clicked steadily on the pavement, echoing against glass towers and evening traffic. On a street corner, a street musician played saxophone slow, soulful notes that carried memory. For a moment, she stopped to listen. The sound reminded her of her father, a man she barely remembered but who once played blues on their porch until the neighbors joined in. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Dr. Cole, a young male voice asked, "This is Eli Turner from the Tribune. I filmed the video on the flight. I just wanted you to know. People are listening. They're calling it the Seat 2A movement." She smiled faintly. "Is that what they're calling it?" "Yes, ma'am. It's everywhere. Some say you're inspiring a new kind of protest, quiet, but powerful." Amara looked up at the night sky. The first stars barely visible above the city haze. Then, let's hope the quiet parts start to change the loud ones. After she hung up, she stood there for a while, breathing in the cool air. For the first time that day, she felt something gentle stirring inside her, a mix of sadness and purpose. The kind that told her this moment wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to stand aside. As she walked away, the saxophone trailed behind her like a memory, soft and haunting. The world had seen a black woman pushed out of a seat. What it hadn't realized yet was that it had also just seen the beginning of a reckoning. Morning light poured through the glass walls of the Cole Foundation, soft and golden, cutting across the marble floor. The city below was already moving, unaware that a quiet storm was forming on the top floor. Dr. Amara Cole stood by the window, coffee untouched, her phone buzzing with relentless urgency. Every news outlet wanted a statement. Reporters were camping outside the lobby. Investors demanded reassurance. Some called her a hero. Others called her reckless. But through it all, Amara said nothing. At exactly 8:47 her phone rang again. The screen flashed Daniel Price. She exhaled and picked up. "Amara," he said quickly, his tone tight, defensive. "Before you hang up, please listen. I'm listening," she replied, her voice steady. "There's chaos in the markets," he continued. "Celestial shares dropped 23% overnight. My board is calling for a damage assessment. The FAA is asking questions about the crew. You gotta let me handle this before it spirals further." Amara turned toward her desk, where the contract folder still lay open, unsigned. "Daniel, it didn't spiral because of me. It spiraled because you built a culture that made something like this inevitable." He hesitated. "You're right, but you and we've built something together. Don't let this destroy it." Amara looked out the window again. "You're assuming it wasn't already broken?" There was silence, heavy and long. "Amara," Daniel finally said, "you're freezing $600 million. That's half our sustainability budget. My people are panicking. Investors are demanding your statement. Are you planning to speak publicly?" "No." She let the word hang in the air. "The world doesn't need my anger. They need to see what happens when arrogance meets accountability." Daniel sighed, frustrated. "If you'd just, Daniel," she interrupted gently. "You were my friend. But friendship doesn't excuse silence. I'll see what your company does without borrowed integrity." She ended the call and turned off her phone. The world outside continued to hum, but inside, she felt something unfamiliar clarity. Her assistant, Dana, appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Cole, Mr. Liang says your inbox is crashing. Over 200 media requests. And let them wait." Amara said softly, "Tell him to prepare a statement for the board instead." What kind of statement? Amara glanced at the clock. one that makes them uncomfortable. By mid-morning, she was in the boardroom. 12 faces watched her, a mixture of awe and apprehension. Some were with her because they believed in reform, others because they feared being left behind. Amara began without notes. Yesterday's incident wasn't a mistake, she said. It was a mirror. It showed us exactly what our world still looks like. One man cleared his throat. With all due respect, Dr. Cole, this might be too emotional a response. You've always preached rational leadership. Amara nodded slowly. Rational leadership doesn't mean moral neutrality. If I don't respond to bias with action, then all I've done is decorate the problem with calm words. The room fell silent. Her tone wasn't raised, but every word landed heavy. Mr. Liang spoke next. The Foundation's public trust is growing, but the pressure is enormous. Are you prepared for the consequences? I am, Amara said, because silence has worse consequences than discomfort. A woman from the PR division leaned forward. We could frame this as a statement about equality and travel release a video, soften the backlash. People love redemption arcs. Amara's lips tightened. This isn't a movie, it's reality, and reality doesn't change with slogans. After the meeting, she walked back to her office. The hallway was filled with whispers, but she didn't slow down. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. Dr. Cole. It was a woman's voice this time, nervous, quiet. My name is Grace Nolan. Amara paused. She knew that name, the flight attendant. Grace, she said calmly. I didn't expect your call. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Grace stammered. I didn't mean to treat me differently. Grace hesitated. Yes, I panicked. He was a platinum client. I was afraid of losing my job. Amara sat down, closing her eyes. She could hear the trembling in the woman's voice. It wasn't hatred. It was fear, the kind that had been taught, repeated, rewarded. Do you understand what that fear costs? Amara asked quietly. Yes, Grace whispered. I do now. Everyone's seen the video. I've been suspended. People online are calling me racist. I just wanted to tell you I'm not. I believe you. Amara interrupted. You're not the disease. Grace, you're the symptom, and I'm not here to destroy you. But I need you to understand something. Silence, even when it's convenient, is still a choice. There was a long pause on the line. Then Grace said softly, I do understand. For what it's worth, I hope you change them. When the call ended, Amara sat still for a long time. Outside, a siren wailed far below, fading into the noise of the city. She thought about Grace not as an enemy, but as another piece in the puzzle she'd spent her life trying to solve. Her intercom buzzed again. Dr. Cole, a reporter from the Tribune, is here. Eli Turner. He says it's urgent. Send him in. Eli entered, camera bag slung over his shoulder, eyes bright with purpose. Dr. Cole, thank you for seeing me. The video's hit 12 million views, but something strange is happening. Someone's trying to suppress it. A private network sent takedown requests to every platform. Amara's expression hardened. Someone doesn't want accountability trending? He nodded. Exactly. And I think it's coming from inside Celestial Air. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, a spark of calculation lit her eyes. Eli, do you still have the original file? Yes. Good. Keep it safe. And post a time-stamped copy somewhere they can't touch. If truth has enemies, let it find allies. Eli nodded, eyes wide. "You're not afraid of them." "Fear doesn't build anything," she said. "It only preserves what's broken." When he left, Amara turned back toward the window. The sky was streaked with light, the kind that precedes a storm. She could feel something shifting, both outside and within. Her phone vibrated again, a message from an anonymous number. "You should be careful who you humiliate." She stared at it for a moment, then deleted it without expression. For every threat, there was always fear hiding behind it, and Amara had spent a lifetime learning not to feed fear. By late afternoon, the Foundation's website had crashed twice under traffic. The public wanted her statement. They wanted outrage, but she wasn't giving them fire. She was giving them silence, and silence, when chosen, was far more dangerous. As dusk fell, Amara sat alone in her office, reading old notes her mother had written in the margins of a medical textbook. "Never let the world make you smaller than your purpose." She whispered the words aloud, letting them linger somewhere inside. She felt the first ache of fatigue, but also a pulse of something stronger resolve. The next morning, her assistant would hand her a new report. Celestial Air's stock had plunged another 15%, and whispers of insider corruption had started to surface. But for now, in that quiet office, bathed in fading light, Amara simply closed her eyes and whispered to the memory of her mother. "Mom, I didn't fight back. I built back." By sunrise the next day, the story had already crossed oceans. Major networks in London, Toronto, and Sydney were replaying the same footage. Dr. Amara Cole, calm and composed, stepping off a plane while two white attendants avoided her gaze. Each frame was replayed, dissected, slowed down until every blink became a statement, every breath an accusation. Hashtags like "You seat 2A" and "Each dignity is not luxury" trended worldwide. But while the internet turned her into a symbol, Amara was buried in numbers, her foundation's investment portfolios, corporate statements, ethical policy drafts, all under revision. The office buzzed with nervous energy as calls poured in from every direction. Dana, her assistant, could barely keep up. "Dr. Cole," she said, bursting in. "We've received over 50 partnership withdrawal notices. Some are from companies connected to Celestial Air." "They're scared." "Of losing their funding?" Amara asked without looking up. "Yes, and some of being next." Amara closed her laptop. Good. Fear can be instructive if it makes them look in the mirror. Across town, Daniel Price wasn't sleeping either. In Celestial Air's Manhattan headquarters, the boardroom lights had been burning since midnight. His top executives surrounded him, a war room of suits and screens. "Sir," said CFO Angela Watts, "the Foundation freeze cost us a third of our liquidity. If we don't issue a public apology now, investors might force a leadership vote." Daniel rubbed his temples. An apology without reform is theater, and reform without profit is suicide. Another executive shot back. He stood abruptly. "You think I don't know that you think I wanted this?" The room fell silent. For the first time, Daniel looked less like a CEO and more like a man cornered by his own empire. "Find her," he finally said. "I want to talk to Amara face to face." That same afternoon, Amara met with her legal team and the Foundation's ethics board. The atmosphere was taut but focused. "Dr. Cole." "Mr." Liang began, adjusting his glasses. "Our audit team uncovered something strange. A pattern of insider transactions linked to someone inside Celestial Air's finance department. These trades began weeks before your incident." Amara's eyes narrowed. They were preparing for a scandal before it happened. It seems that way, but the leak traces back to someone named Arthur Finch, former consultant, now working through shell accounts, the same man who demanded your seat. Amara felt her pulse slow. So it wasn't just racism. It was strategy. Liang nodded grimly. We suspect he wanted to tank Celestial stock, profit from the fall, and shift blame to the company's diversity controversy. Your reaction accelerated everything. So he weaponized bias for money, Amara murmured, and everyone else, Karen, Grace, even Daniel, became his pawns. A heavy silence followed. Liang, she said finally, contact Eli Turner. I want this traced to the end. Every account, every link. If Finch thought this was a game, let's show him the cost of playing dirty. By evening, Amara's office turned into a command center. Laptops glowed under dim lights as Eli, Liang, and Dana cross-referenced transaction logs with whistleblower data. The more they found, the darker it got. Finch had been short in airline stocks across multiple carriers, each time sparking a racially charged incident that drew headlines. It was an industry-wide manipulation. At midnight, Eli looked up from his screen. Dr. Cole. He's been doing this for 2 years. He stages conflict, leaks it to the press, makes millions on the market dip. Amara folded her hands, and this time, he picked the wrong woman. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Daniel. He agreed instantly. They met at the top floor of the Corinthian Hotel, a glass tower overlooking the Hudson River. Daniel arrived first, shoulders tense, voice low. Amara, thank you for coming. I've been meaning to apologize. I'm not here for apologies. She interrupted. I'm here for accountability. He blinked, meaning she slid a folder across the table, meaning that your former consultant, Arthur Finch, engineered my humiliation to manipulate your stock. He wasn't just a bigot, he was a saboteur. You can confirm the data yourself. My team cross-checked everything. Daniel opened the folder, his face drained of color. This can't be real. Oh, it's real, Amara said softly. And if the SEC gets these files before you act, Celestial Air will be remembered not just for discrimination but for fraud. Daniel closed the folder, exhaling. What do you want? I want reform. Not a press release, not a charity pledge, real, structural change. He looked at her, defeated. Tell me what that looks like. Amara leaned forward. You'll sign the Aero Equity Charter, a new internal code requiring transparent bias reporting, third-party audits, and an independent passenger rights board. You'll fund scholarships for underrepresented youth in aviation, and you'll publicly acknowledge that this wasn't a PR accident, it was a cultural failure. Daniel hesitated. That could destroy us. She held his gaze, or it could save you. Outside, lightning flashed over the river. For a long time, Daniel said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. I'll do it, but Finch, he won't go quietly. Amara smiled faintly. He doesn't have to. The truth is louder. The next day, Eli published his article, Insider Scandal, The Man Who Profited from Prejudice. It spread like wildfire. Finch's accounts were frozen within hours. The FBI raided his townhouse that evening. The footage of his arrest played side by side with clips of Amara being asked to leave her seat. The public connected the dots. Discrimination had become a currency, and someone had been trading it. By nightfall, Celestial Air held an emergency press conference. Cameras flashed as Daniel stood before the world. pale but resolute. Our company failed not only one passenger, but the very principle of fairness. Under Dr. Amara Cole's guidance, we will rebuild from truth, not silence. Amara watched the broadcast from her office. For once, she allowed herself to breathe. Dana came in quietly, holding a tablet. Dr. Cole, the internet's exploding again, but this time they're calling it the Cole effect. Amara smiled faintly. That's not what I wanted. I know, Dana said softly, but maybe it's what people needed. Later that evening, as the city lights shimmered outside her window, Amara received one more call from Grace Nolan. Dr. Cole, I saw the news, Finch's arrest. I just wanted to thank you. For what? For not giving up on people like me? You could have crushed us, but instead you taught us something. Amara's voice softened. Grace, I didn't do this to teach. I did it to remind the world that dignity isn't negotiable. There was a pause. Then Grace said quietly, I'm applying for the new passenger equity training program Celestial announced. Maybe I can be part of fixing what I broke. Amara closed her eyes and smiled. Then, maybe something good came out of all this after all. As she hung up, she glanced at her mother's old note pinned to the corner of her desk. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to stand anyway. She whispered. We stood. Mom. Outside. Thunder rolled in the distance, but for the first time, it didn't sound like warning. It sounded like change. Morning sunlight filtered into Amara's office, turning the glass walls into mirrors of gold. For the first time in weeks, the air felt different. Not peaceful change, never was, but steady. Outside, headlines blazed across every screen, Arthur Finch arrested in insider scandal. Celestial air signs, historic equity charter. The world was finally catching up to what Amara had known all along. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the cracks of a broken system until the walls crumble. Dana entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. You've been up all night again, haven't you? Amara smiled faintly. The world doesn't fix itself while we sleep. Dana handed her a cup. Still, you deserve rest. You've started something much bigger than a viral story. Amara looked toward the skyline, where morning fog softened the edges of skyscrapers. A story fades. A standard doesn't. We have to make sure this isn't just a week of outrage, but a decade of reform. At that very moment, in another corner of the city, Daniel Price was given his most difficult board presentation yet. The executives sat stiff, their faces tight with calculation and resentment. This charter doctor, Cole proposed. One man said sharply, it's public suicide. You're turning us into activists when we should be focused on revenue. Daniel's gaze hardened. Revenue without integrity is rot, and rot spreads. Angela Watts, the CFO, leaned forward. The investors won't like it. Then let them go, Daniel said quietly. The ones who stay will be the future. For a second, no one spoke. Then, to his surprise, Angela nodded. You're right. It's time we stop surviving scandal to start earning trust. Outside the boardroom, journalists waited for statements, but Daniel didn't stop to talk. He had one more meeting, one he needed to face alone. By afternoon, he was standing in the lobby of the Cole Foundation. Amara looked up as he entered. Daniel, she said softly, I didn't expect you so soon. He looked older than she remembered, exhausted, yet lighter somehow. I wanted to tell you this in person, he said. The charter's signed. Every clause, every word, and I've offered Grace Nolan her job back if she completes the new ethics and bias certification." Amara's eyes softened. "That's unexpected. She asked for it," Daniel said quietly. "She said you made her want to be better. I think you made a lot of us want that." Amara folded her hands. "This isn't about me, Daniel. It's about what's next. Change doesn't stop at one company." He nodded. "I know, which is why I want to fund the next phase of your initiative, the Cole Equity Alliance, a network for systemic reform across airlines and corporate travel." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're serious?" Daniel met her gaze. "Serious enough to invest $50 million to start. I owe you that much. Or maybe we owe it to everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong." For the first time since that day on the plane, Amara allowed herself to smile small, weary, but real. "Then let's make belonging the new standard." By the end of that week, the world had shifted again. News broke that the Cole Equity Alliance was launching in partnership with over 30 major corporations. Public response was overwhelming letters, donations, testimonials from passengers and employees who'd endured quiet prejudice for years. One letter, however, stood out. It came handwritten, with trembling pen strokes. "Dear Dr. Cole, I watched everything unfold from my hospital bed. I'm a retired flight attendant, 30 years in the air. I've seen kindness, cruelty, and everything in between. What you did gave me peace. You reminded me that the sky belongs to everyone. Sincerely, Ruth M." Amara reread it 3 times before placing it in her drawer, beside her mother's note. Small words carried the biggest truths. Weeks later, she was invited to speak at the United Nations Global Ethics Forum. She stood on stage beneath a glass dome, lights reflecting across her face as the audience hushed. "When I was a child," she began, "my mother used to tell me that dignity doesn't ask for permission, it demands recognition. That day, on Flight 93, I was told to give up my seat. What they didn't realize was that they weren't asking me to move from a chair. They were asking me to move from my worth. And that I could never do." Her voice remained calm, even as applause rippled through the hall. "We live in a world where equality shouldn't need to be defended, but it still does. And while systems can change, hearts must change too. That's where reform truly begins." Afterward, reporters swarmed her. Questions flew about power, forgiveness, influence, but one young journalist asked softly, "Dr. Cole, do you forgive them?" Amara paused, choosing her words carefully. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to let bitterness become your language. I don't carry anger. I carry purpose." That quote made headlines around the world. Yet, in private, Amara didn't feel powerful. She felt human. Late that night, she stood by her apartment window overlooking the East River. City lights flickered like constellations scattered across glass. Her phone buzzed a message from Grace Nolan. "Dr. Cole, I passed my training. Start a new role next week. Thank you for giving me a second chance." Amara typed back slowly, "Make it count. Grace, you're part of the change now." She placed the phone aside and poured herself a glass of water. The city's hum softened into a lullaby. For the first time in a long time, she exhaled without weight in her chest. The next morning brought yet another twist. Eli Turner arrived at her office, holding a sealed envelope. "It's from the Department of Justice," he said, handing it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a formal notice. Arthur Finch pleaded guilty to securities fraud and will serve 9 years in federal prison. Eli spoke quietly. It's over. Amara shook her head. No, Eli, it's just beginning. Justice isn't a moment, it's maintenance. He smiled. You always find a way to make even victory sound like responsibility. Because it is, she said softly. If we stop watching, it all returns to the shadows. Later that afternoon, Amara walked through the airport for the first time since the incident. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She noticed small things: a black family being greeted warmly at check-in, a young Latino pilot laughing with his crew, a woman in a wheelchair receiving genuine assistance instead of pity. Tiny shifts, but real. As she reached her gate, an attendant looked up and smiled. Welcome back, Dr. Cole. We've been expecting you. Amara blinked, surprised. You know who I am. The attendant nodded. Everyone does. You reminded us what respect looks like. Amara smiled gently. Then promise me you'll keep it alive when no one's watching. I will, the woman said. We all will. When Amara boarded the plane, she took her seat 2A again. She placed her hands on the armrests, closed her eyes, and breathed. The engines rumbled beneath her feet, a low hum that felt like renewal. As the plane lifted into the sky, she looked out the window and whispered, Mom, I kept the seat, but more than that, I kept the promise. High above the clouds, the sun broke through golden, unwavering, endless. The winter wind swept across Manhattan, whispering through the narrow streets like a warning. It was December now, and the city was wrapped in lights. The world celebrating the season of peace. But for Amara Cole, peace was still a distant horizon. Change had come, but not without its shadow. Her foundation had grown threefold in just months. New partnerships, endless calls, global recognition. And yet, with every headline praising her leadership came another wave of criticism from those who felt threatened. Some called her a visionary, others a tyrant. Every time she opened her inbox, there were reminders that progress demanded payment, and that payment was peace of mind. Dana walked into her office that morning, holding a printed email. Dr. Cole, you should see this. Amara looked up from her desk. What is it? It's from the Corporate Ethics Council. They're nominating you for Global Leader of the Year. Amara raised an eyebrow. You sound like that's bad news. Dana hesitated. It's complicated. They're also asking you to join a televised panel with your critics. They want drama. They want ratings. Amara sighed, leaning back in her chair. So they want to turn accountability into entertainment. Pretty much, Dana said softly. But if you refuse, they'll say you're hiding. Amara stood and walked toward the window, the skyline glittering below. Let them talk. I didn't come this far to win applause. I came to build something that lasts. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Daniel Price. Need to talk. Urgent. An hour later, she was at the Celestial Air headquarters, greeted not by cameras this time, but by tension. Daniel's assistant led her into the executive conference room. Daniel was already there, his tie loosened, face lined with fatigue. Amara, he began, we've got a problem. I assumed so, she said quietly. The kind of urgency you text with doesn't come from optimism. He managed a faint smile, then turned serious. The alliance is under attack. Some of our competitors are calling it reverse discrimination. They're lobbying Congress to limit DEI initiatives in corporate aviation. Amara's gaze darkened. So they're weaponizing equality against itself. Daniel nodded. If they succeed, half of what we built could collapse. She walked to the end of the table, fingers trailing the smooth surface. Do you remember what you told me the first day we met, that your industry was built on trust? Daniel nodded slowly. Well, she continued, then let's make trust our weapon. If they want to play politics, we'll play transparency. He frowned. How open data? Publish everything higher in demographics, pay equity, passenger complaints, let the public see what's broken and what's being fixed. You can't argue with truth if it's already visible. Daniel looked at her for a long moment before saying quietly, You never stop. Do you? Amara smiled faintly. Not until the air feels fair. 2 days later, they launched the Clear Skies Report, a public digital dashboard showing Celestial's internal reforms in real time. Every hire, every complaint, every policy change was visible to the world. The reaction was immediate. Some praised it as revolutionary transparency. Others called it corporate suicide. But within a week, passenger trust soared. Eli Turner's next article read, From Outrage to Overhaul: How One Woman Forced a billion-dollar Industry to Look in the Mirror. That evening, Eli stopped by the Cole Foundation for an interview. As his camera lights flickered on, Amara adjusted her posture. Calm as ever. Dr. Cole, Eli began, you've become a symbol of resilience. But tell me honestly, has it been worth it? Amara paused, her gaze distant. Change never feels worth it while it's happening. It hurts. It isolates. It exposes everything fragile in you. But then you look around and realize people are walking through doors that used to be locked. And suddenly, yes, it's worth every scar. Eli lowered his camera slightly, voice softer. Do you ever feel lonely in it? Her answer came quietly. Every day. But I remind myself loneliness is the tax of leadership. You can't build bridges without first standing where no one else has. When he left, the office fell into silence again. Dana appeared at the doorway, holding a file. Dr. Cole, before you go home, there's something else. She handed Amara a stack of letters handwritten from students who'd received scholarships under the new Cole Equity Program. Each told a story of hope. A young girl from Mississippi who wanted to be a pilot, a single father studying to become an aviation engineer, a refugee student accepted into a U.S. aviation school. Amara read them one by one. Her hands trembled slightly. Dana, sometimes I forget why I started. These letters remind me. Then maybe you're not alone after all, Dana said softly. That night, Amara walked home instead of taking her car. Snow had begun to fall, blanketing the sidewalks in quiet silver. The city, for once, seemed hushed. As she crossed 42nd Street, she caught sight of a billboard glowing above the skyline. It read, Dignity flies with us, celestial air. Her face was on it. She stopped, staring up at it. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, half to herself, let it mean more than marketing. At home. She lit a candle beside her mother's old photograph. Lydia Cole's smile seemed almost alive in the flickering light. You were right. Mom, she murmured. The world doesn't change with anger. It changes with endurance. Her phone buzzed again, a call from Daniel. Amara, are you watching the news? No. Why, they're announcing something at the White House. The president just signed the Civil Equity Aviation Act modeled after your charter. Amara froze. What Daniel's voice wavered with disbelief. You did it. Amara, It's law now." Her breath caught, and for the first time in months, tears came quiet, unguarded, unstoppable. She sank into her chair, the weight of everything finally catching up. Change had a price, and she had paid it. But this was the receipt. The next morning, headlines around the world echoed the same message from seat 2A to the Senate floor: how Dr. Amara Cole changed the skies. Every news channel replayed her image walking through the airport that day. The humiliation, the calm, the refusal to bow. It had started as an act of dignity. It ended as a revolution. As she left her apartment that morning, the doorman smiled. "Morning, Dr. Cole. The sky looks clearer today." She returned the smile. "It does, doesn't it?" She stepped outside, the cold air biting but alive. For the first time, she felt the weight of change lift just enough for her to breathe freely. The morning air over Washington, D.C., carried the quiet hum of history. A thin layer of frost shimmered across the Capitol steps, and the sky had that pale, open color that seemed to invite change. Cameras and microphones lined the plaza as the world gathered to witness something few had thought possible: a new law born not from politics, but from principle. Dr. Amara Cole stood in the crowd, not on stage but among ordinary citizens. Her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She didn't want the spotlight today. She wanted to see what her fight had built when her name wasn't the center of it. Daniel Price approached her through the crowd, adjusting his coat. "You're really not going up there?" he asked. Amara smiled slightly. "No, let them have their moment. The work's done when it belongs to everyone." He chuckled softly. "You say that like you're tired of winning." "I'm not tired of winning," she said quietly. "I'm tired of fighting for what should have been fair all along." When the president stepped to the podium, the applause was deafening. "Today," he began, "we sign into law the Civil Equity Aviation Act, a piece of legislation that ensures equal treatment and transparency in all sectors of air travel." But this law didn't start here in these halls. It started on a plane with one woman's refusal to surrender her dignity. The crowd turned instinctively toward Amara. She lowered her head slightly, humbled and uncomfortable with the weight of their gaze. Dana, standing beside her, whispered, "They're talking about you." "I know," Amara murmured, her voice barely audible, "but I'm talking about all of them." After the ceremony, reporters swarmed. Eli Turner, now a correspondent for Global Chronicle, was the first to reach her. "Dr. Cole, the world's calling this your victory. What does it feel like to make history?" Amara met his eyes. "History isn't made by one person. It's made when enough people stop being silent. I just happened to be sitting in seat 2A when silence wasn't an option." The quote spread instantly. Within hours, it was printed on banners, painted on murals, and turned into a rallying cry. Silence wasn't an option. But away from the flashbulbs, Amara found herself in the quiet aftermath. The applause faded, and what remained was a deep, reflective silence. That night, she returned to her apartment, kicked off her heels, and sat by the window watching the Potomac shimmer under the moonlight. Her reflection looked both older and freer. Her phone buzzed. It was a video message from Grace Nolan. She pressed play. "Hi, Dr. Cole," Grace began, her voice steady but emotional. "I'm calling from our first passenger equity class. Today, we trained 50 new attendants on bias awareness and empathy. Some of them cried during the session because they saw themselves in me. You changed how I see my job. I used to think my duty was to serve passengers. Now I know it's to see them." Amara smiled through tears. "That," she whispered, "is the world I wanted to see." Days turned into weeks. The Cole Foundation received a flood of support letters, donations, and even art projects inspired by her movement. A sculpture of her standing calmly with her boarding pass was unveiled at JFK Airport, not as a monument to fame, but to perseverance. She visited it quietly one morning. An older man stood nearby, his granddaughter pointing at the plaque. "She's the lady who didn't give up her seat," the little girl said. The man nodded. "She's the reason you can fly wherever you want and be treated with respect." Amara watched silently, heart swelling. When the girl noticed her and smiled shyly, she simply waved. The moment didn't need words. Later that day, Amara met with Daniel and Angela at Celestial's new headquarters. The company's lobby looked different, bright murals, diverse portraits of employees, and a sign at the entrance reading, "Every sky belongs to everyone." Angela handed Amara a folder. "Our quarterly report. Bias-related complaints down 80%, passenger satisfaction up 50%. We're setting a new industry benchmark," Daniel added. "And every airline that once criticized us, they're copying us now." Amara laughed softly. Imitation the final stage of resistance, but beneath the success, something in her eyes dimmed slightly. "You know," she said, "I still think about that day sometimes, about how close I was to walking away. If I had, none of this would exist." Daniel looked at her, his tone serious. "You didn't walk away. You walked through." That night, Amara attended a gala honoring the passage of the new law. The ballroom shimmered with light, chandeliers gleaming like constellations. Politicians, CEOs, activists all wanted to shake her hand. But amid the glitter, she felt an ache of distance. During dinner, a young journalist approached timidly. "Dr. Cole, I know you've answered this 1,000 times, but if you could say one thing to that version of yourself on the plane, the one who was told to move, what would it be?" Amara smiled gently. "I'd tell her, don't sit still, not because they deserve your silence, but because the world deserves your stand." Her words echoed long after the applause faded. Later, she slipped out onto the balcony. The city lights flickered below, a mosaic of motion and meaning. Daniel joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "You know," he said, "I used to think leadership was about control. Turns out, it's about courage." Amara clinked her glass lightly against his, and humility. He nodded. That too. They stood in silence for a while, watching the night stretch wide and endless. When she returned home later that night, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dr. Cole, you don't know me, but I was one of the mechanics who worked on Flight 93. That day changed me. I used to ignore the way people were treated, told myself it wasn't my business. But after seeing what happened to you, I promised I'd never look away again. Yesterday, I stopped a situation before it escalated, because of you. Respectfully, Marcus D." Amara pressed the note to her chest. The tears that came this time were different, lighter, freer. The next morning, she visited her mother's grave for the first time in months. The cemetery was quiet, sunlight filtering through bare trees. She knelt beside the stone, brushing snow from the engraved name. "Mom," she said softly. They finally listened. Not because I shouted louder, but because I refused to be quiet. She stayed there a while, talking in whispers to the woman who had taught her everything about strength without noise. When she finally stood to leave, a breeze swept through, rustling the winter leaves. For a moment, she swore she heard her mother's voice, faint but sure. "You kept your seat, baby, and you made room for others too." Amara smiled through the tears and walked toward her car, the morning sun glinting off her black coat like threads of gold. The fight that had once defined her now felt like legacy alive, breathing, unstoppable. As she drove away, she glanced at the sky, painted with streaks of rose and gold. The world looked vast again, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small beneath it. She felt right where she belonged. Spring arrived softly that year. The snow that had blanketed the city melted into quiet streams along the sidewalks, and Central Park bloomed in shades of pink and gold. Amara Cole walked along the path just after dawn, coffee in hand, scarf fluttering in the breeze. The world felt slower now, like it had finally learned how to breathe again. But Amara, she still carried the invisible hum of responsibility wherever she went. Every few steps, someone recognized her. Some nodded respectfully, others smiled shyly, and a few stopped her just to say thank you. She met them all with warmth, but deep down, it always felt surreal. She never set out to be a symbol. She just wanted fairness to stop being a luxury. That afternoon, she arrived at the Cole Foundation for the quarterly meeting of the Equity Alliance. Inside the glass-walled conference room, representatives from 20 countries sat around a single table. Flags, laptops, and coffee cups cluttered the space. Daniel Price was already there, talking quietly with Angela Watts, while Dana arranged presentation notes at the far end. As Amara entered, the chatter hushed. She smiled faintly. "Good morning, everyone. Let's make this worth the air we breathe." A soft ripple of laughter broke the tension. She clicked her tablet, and the room lights dimmed. On the screen behind her appeared a simple slide, "From reaction to responsibility." 3 years ago, Amara began, a single act of bias nearly broke an industry. Today, that same incident has reshaped how the world talks about dignity, transparency, and leadership. But success, she paused, isn't the absence of problems, it's the courage to keep solving them. She turned toward the window, where the skyline stretched far and wide. The Alliance has achieved more than I dreamed: diversity boards in over 100 airlines, anonymous equity reporting, education funds. But the question now is, how do we make this last beyond us? Angela leaned forward. "Dr. Cole, that's exactly why we've invited our new partners from Nairobi, Delhi, and Sao Paulo. They've been developing community-based training programs that extend these reforms beyond corporate offices to airports, schools, and local pilots." Amara's eyes brightened. That's the bridge we needed. Then a young woman from the Nairobi delegation stood up. Her voice trembled slightly at first. "Dr. Cole, my mother was on one of the early celestial flights after the reform. She said it was the first time she was greeted not as a passenger, but as a person. You gave that to us. You gave that to her." For a moment, Amara had no words. The room seemed to blur around her, and she felt a familiar ache rise in her chest, the kind that came when her mother's voice echoed in memory. After the meeting, she stayed behind, staring at the city lights reflected on the table's glass surface. Daniel entered quietly, placing 2 cups of tea down. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Yes, just thinking how something that started as humiliation became hope for so many. I didn't expect it to feel this heavy." Daniel sat across from her. "That's what legacy is, Amara. It's heavy because it matters." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes I wonder if it's too heavy for one person." He shook his head. "Then don't carry it alone. That's why we're all here." That evening, she left the office and walked toward the memorial sculpture at JFK Airport. The setting sun painted the metal figure in warm gold. She ran her hand along the cool surface of the inscription, "Dignity is not a destination, it's how we travel." A little boy nearby tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mom, is that her?" His mother smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, that's Dr. Cole." The boy looked up at Amara, wide-eyed. "You're the lady from the plane." Amara knelt so she was eye level with him. "I am," she said softly. "What's your name, Eli?" he said proudly. She smiled. "That's a good name. You know what's funny? Eli means ascend to rise." He grinned. "Like airplanes." "Exactly," she said, her voice warm. "But not just airplanes, like people too." The boy thought for a moment. "Did you rise?" Amara looked toward the sky, then back at him. "I think we all did." Later that night, back in her apartment, Amara sat by the window with an old leather journal in her lap, the one her mother, Lydia, had given her before she passed. The pages were filled with notes, half-thoughts, and reminders scribbled during sleepless nights. But on the last page, she began to write something new. Legacy is not what we leave behind. It's who rises because of us. She closed the journal, feeling both the weight and peace of the words. Then, a knock at the door. Dana stood there, holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said softly. Amara opened it. Inside was a handwritten invitation from the Smithsonian. They wanted to include her boarding pass, the original one from Seat 2A, in their new exhibit on civil rights in the 21st century. She stared at the paper for a long time. "They're turning my worst day into history." Dana smiled, because it changed everything. The next day, Amara traveled to Washington again. Inside the Smithsonian, a small crowd gathered as she donated the boarding pass to the exhibit. It was placed beside other artifacts of modern courage protest signs, letters, photographs. When the curator asked if she'd like to say a few words, she stepped to the microphone and said quietly, "This isn't a symbol of anger. It's a reminder of choice, the choice to stay seated when dignity is questioned. May no one ever have to make that choice again." When the crowd applauded, she caught sight of Eli Turner filming quietly in the back. After the ceremony, he approached. Still the same calm voice, he said. She smiled, maybe calmer. "The storm's behind me now, behind you. Maybe," Eli said, "but not behind the world. You've become its compass." That night, she returned to her office and found Daniel waiting near the elevator. "I heard about the exhibit," he said. "You've become a part of history." "Amara." She chuckled softly. "History's overrated. I'm more interested in the future." He smiled. "Then you'll like this." He handed her a tablet showing plans for the first Cole Leadership Institute, a new training center for ethical leadership in aviation and business. Amara studied the blueprint. "You named it after me, you inspired it," he said simply. "And we need to train leaders who know that progress isn't policy, it's empathy." For a long time, she stared at the screen, her reflection merging with the digital plans. The future was already unfolding, and she was part of its blueprint. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. Then let's build it not to glorify me, but to protect the next person who thinks they're too small to make a change. Outside, night fell gently over the city. Lights flickered in every window, reflections rippling across the Hudson. Somewhere far above, a plane cut across the sky, its path clear and unwavering. Amara watched it disappear into the clouds and whispered to herself, "That's the thing about legacy. It doesn't land. It keeps flying." The evening sky over Manhattan shimmered with rain. From her corner office on the 54th floor, Amara Cole stood before the tall windows, watching streaks of lightning flash behind the Empire State Building. The city pulsed with energy, but inside, silence reigned, a silence filled with thought. She'd spent the last months traveling, speaking, shaping reforms across continents. Yet tonight, she felt something stirring a tension in the air that no applause could quiet. Her assistant, Dana, entered quietly with a steaming cup of chamomile tea. "You've been standing there for an hour," she said softly. "You should sit." "Amara." Amara turned, her face half lit by the city glow. "Do you ever feel like the calm is just waiting for the next storm?" Dana smiled faintly. "You've weathered worse." "True," Amara replied. "But sometimes the hardest storms aren't outside, they're the ones that test what we've built." Just then, her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted call from Angela Watts, CFO of Celestial Air. Amara answered, her expression tightening as she listened. "Say that again," she said, her tone sharpening. Angela's voice came through, low and controlled. A whistleblower sent internal documents to the media. They're claiming Celestial Air has quietly reinstated several terminated employees from the discrimination cases, including Karen Miles. Amara froze. Karen, the flight attendant who had humiliated her that day. "Impossible," Amara said flatly. "That would violate the transparency protocol." Angela sighed. "Apparently, a regional VP authorized it under a rehabilitation clause. It's legal on paper, but ethically rotten." Amara exhaled, the old sting of memory rising again. "I'll handle it. Thank you, Angela." After hanging up, she sat down, eyes distant. "She's back," she whispered. Dana frowned. "Who Karen Miles?" The name hung in the air like static. Dana's expression hardened. After everything that happened, Amara nodded slowly. People forget. Systems drift. Integrity erodes if you don't watch it. The next morning, she walked into Celestial Air's headquarters. Employees whispered as she passed, but Amara's calm presence filled every corridor. She entered the boardroom where Daniel Pross and several executives were waiting. The tension was thick enough to cut. "Amara," Daniel began carefully. "I know how this looks," but she raised a hand. "Don't justify it. Explain it." Daniel sighed. "The reinstatement wasn't my decision. Legal approved it as part of the Second Chance Initiative. They claim Karen completed her ethics rehabilitation program." Amara's jaw clenched. "Second chances are for those who take responsibility." She never did. Her apology was performative, her silence louder than remorse. "She claims she's changed," Daniel said quietly. "She's been volunteering in community work, helping with inclusion training." Amara paced slowly, her heels echoing, and yet no one thought to inform the woman whose humiliation sparked the reform transparency means accountability. Daniel, not selective disclosure. Daniel's expression softened. You're right. I should have called you first. She stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes steady. You've built something remarkable here. Don't let compromise rot it from within. Later that day, she requested a meeting with Karen. It took place in a small training room at the Celestial Learning Center. Karen entered hesitantly, looking thinner, older, more subdued. Her once crisp uniform had been replaced by a modest navy blazer. When she saw Amara, she froze. Dr. Cole. Amara nodded. Ms. Miles. There was a long pause. Only the faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the air. Karen spoke first, her voice trembling. I didn't expect you'd want to see me. I didn't, Amara said softly, but I needed to understand what brought you back here. Karen swallowed. I wanted to make things right. I've been working with the reform program talking to new recruits about bias. About the moment I failed to see another human being. Amara watched her carefully. And do you believe you've changed tears welled in Karen's eyes? I do. But I know that doesn't undo what I did to you. I humiliated you, and I was cruel because I could be. I thought I was protecting my authority, but I was just protecting my ego. Amara's face softened, but her tone remained steady. I don't hate you, Karen. I never did. But accountability isn't about vengeance. It's about the people who come after us, those who'll sit in those seats without fear. Karen nodded, wiping her eyes. That's why I came back, to help them, not to escape what I did. After the meeting, Amara walked alone through the training facility, where young flight attendants practiced conflict resolution scenarios. She watched them for a while, seeing the way they listened, the way they chose empathy first. That evening, Amara returned to her office and drafted a statement for the upcoming press release. It began simply, "Forgiveness is not the absence of memory. It is the decision to turn pain into policy." But before she could send it, Dana rushed in. "You need to see this." She turned on the news. A viral video played a regional supervisor mocking diversity reforms during a training session. The footage showed laughter, racial slurs, dismissive comments about political correctness. The clip had already hit 5 million views. Amara stared at the screen, her hands tightening around the tablet. "So, this is the quiet storm," she murmured. Dana looked at her anxiously. "What will you do?" Amara's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with purpose. "We hold them accountable, again, because reform isn't an event, it's maintenance. The moment you stop tending it, it decays." 2 days later, she convened an emergency summit. Cameras filled the room, reporters packed the aisles. Amara stood at the podium, the emblem of the Cole Foundation shining behind her. "This is not a setback," she began firmly. "It's a reminder. Bias doesn't vanish, it adapts, and so must we." Her speech rippled through the nation. She announced a new oversight system, the Cole Integrity Network, an AI-driven transparency platform that tracks ethics compliance across industries. Every violation would be logged, reviewed, and published publicly. Within hours, corporations across the country reached out to join. Amara didn't celebrate. She simply breathed deeply, knowing progress was fragile but alive. That night, she stood again by the window, rain tracing faint lines down the glass. Dana entered with 2 mugs of tea and said quietly, "You keep turning storms into structure." Amara smiled faintly. Maybe that's all leadership really is, building shelters in the rain. As thunder rolled in the distance, she whispered to herself, "The quiet storm never really ends. It just teaches us to listen better." It was nearly dawn when Amara Cole stood at the rooftop terrace of her foundation's new headquarters. The skyline was waking up sunlight spilling like molten gold over the Hudson, the faint hum of morning traffic below. She closed her eyes, breathing in the air, feeling the rhythm of a city she had once feared, now quietly loved. After years of battles, meetings, hearings, and speeches, this was the first morning that felt still. But it wasn't the stillness of completion. It was the stillness before new beginnings. Dana's voice broke the quiet. "They're ready for you downstairs. The press is already gathering." Amara smiled gently. Always early. She turned, her long beige coat swaying behind her as she headed for the elevator. "How do I look?" Dana's eyes softened, like a woman who rewrote the rules. Downstairs, the atrium was filled with people, employees, reporters, students, and families. A massive banner stretched across the hall, the Cole Institute of Ethical Leadership opening ceremony. There were no corporate logos, no VIP lists, just people ordinary and extraordinary, gathered together under one belief that dignity should never depend on privilege. Amara stepped onto the stage, and the room fell into silence. She looked out, not as a CEO, but as someone who had lived through humiliation, anger, and awakening. Her voice carried calm strength. "Years ago, I boarded a flight just like anyone else, paid for my seat, followed the rules, trusted the system. And yet, that day reminded me that systems are built by people, and people can fail. What matters is what we do after failure." A murmur rippled through the audience. She continued, "When I walked off that plane, I thought it was the end of something, but it became the beginning of a movement, proof that a single act of dignity can shift an entire structure." Behind her, a large screen lit up, showing footage of everyday travelers, flight attendants, and workers participating in new empathy workshops, mentorship programs, and conflict training. The music swelled softly, and Amara's words floated over it. "This institute is not mine. It's ours. It's every person who ever felt unseen but refused to disappear." Applause erupted, echoing through the hall, among the crowd. Karen Miles sat quietly, eyes glistening. She had been invited not as a symbol of the past, but as proof of transformation. Beside her sat Angela Watts, composed as ever, taking notes for her next ethics briefing. Near the back stood Daniel Price, smiling faintly with pride. After the ceremony, reporters clustered around Amara. One young journalist asked, "Dr. Cole, what do you think your legacy will be?" Amara paused, a thoughtful smile playing on her lips. "Legacy," she said, "isn't something you leave behind. It's the light that keeps moving forward, carried by those who believe in it." Later that afternoon, she met Daniel in the Institute's glass-walled cafe overlooking the park. He was reviewing new partnership proposals from airlines and universities. "We've got 40 applications in the first hour," he said, shaking his head. "This might actually change global leadership training." Amara stirred her tea slowly. "Good. But remember, systems can't change hearts. People do. Let's train for that too." Daniel nodded. "We already are. The first student cohort is named after your mother, the Lydia Scholars." Amara froze for a moment, overwhelmed. "You didn't." Daniel smiled gently. "She taught you empathy before anyone else did." It felt right. Her throat tightened. "Thank you." As the evening sun filtered through the glass, A small group of students approached the table. They were young, diverse, bright-eyed. One of them, a tall girl with caramel skin and braids, spoke nervously. "Dr. Cole, I just wanted to say, your story made me change my major. I used to think business was cold. Now I see it can be human." Amara's eyes softened. "Then you're already the kind of leader we need." When they left, Daniel leaned back, smiling. "You realize you're building an entire generation that thinks like you." She chuckled. "Good. Maybe then I can rest someday." That night, Amara received a message from Eli Turner, the journalist who had covered her case years before. It was a video clip from an international conference in Geneva. The screen showed a group of airline executives signing a new global ethics charter modeled after the Cole Initiative. The caption read, "Justice is taking flight worldwide." Amara watched in silence, tears forming in her eyes. The world had not just heard her, it had begun to echo her. A few weeks later, she visited JFK Airport again. The same gate where everything had started was now renamed the Horizon Gate, part of Celestial Air's Equity Line. A plaque on the wall bore her words, "Every passenger carries a story. Every story deserves respect." A little girl wearing pink sneakers approached her shyly. "Are you the lady from the statue?" she asked. Amara laughed softly. "Maybe," she said, kneeling. "Do you like flying?" The girl nodded. "I want to be a pilot someday." "Then promise me something," Amara said warmly. "When you fly, you make sure everyone feels safe no matter what they look like." "I promise," the girl said with a grin. As Amara stood, she saw Karen Miles nearby, helping an elderly passenger with her luggage. Karen caught her eye and smiled. It wasn't the nervous, apologetic smile from before, it was peace. True change, Amara thought, was not when wrongdoers were punished, but when they learned to protect others. That evening, back at her penthouse, Amara sat by the window with her journal open. Outside, airplanes traced silent arcs across the night sky. She wrote slowly, her pen gliding over the page. "The sky belongs to everyone. It always did. We just needed to remember." She closed the journal and looked at the city lights below, tiny, pulsing, alive. Somewhere in that glow were thousands of strangers whose paths she had unknowingly touched. Dana entered quietly. "You're writing again?" she said with a smile. Amara nodded. "Maybe it's time for a book not about me, but about us. About what we learned," Dana asked. "No," Amara said softly. "About what we're still learning." The two women shared a quiet moment, the hum of the city wrapping around them. "Finally," Amara whispered. "You know, I used to think justice was a destination, but it's not. It's a daily practice, like breathing, like compassion." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the river, followed by the low hum of departing planes. Amara looked up, following their trail into the sky, her reflection merging with the clouds on the glass. For the first time in years, she felt light, not because the world was perfect, but because it was finally trying. She whispered one last thought to herself, the words almost carried away by the wind. Maybe dignity was never about standing higher than others. Maybe it's about lifting the sky so everyone can fly beneath it. The story of Dr. Amara Cole reminds us that true strength is often silent. It doesn't come from shouting louder, but from standing taller when the world tries to push you down. Many of us have faced moments when we were overlooked, disrespected, or made to feel invisible. What defines us isn't the pain we endure, but how we transform it. Amara didn't seek revenge. She sought accountability. She used her influence not to destroy, but to rebuild a system where others wouldn't have to experience what she did. Her story teaches that justice isn't about punishing the guilty alone. It's about creating a world where dignity becomes the default, not the exception. For older audiences who have lived through decades of change, her journey resonates deeply. It's never too late to act with integrity, to demand fairness, or to stand for what's right quietly, steadily, and without hatred. Because sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with a single calm decision. No more. Thank you for watching this story of courage and compassion. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us bring more real stories of dignity, justice, and hope to light. Together, let's keep inspiring change, one story at a time.